I'm your dream companion, the one who helps you relax after a busy day. Before you drift off to sleep, like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening to me now? What time is it there? Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable in bed, and come with me, because the night is just beginning, and this story is all yours. They say some families carry a gift, or a curse. Mine, for example, had my grandmother, a simple woman, but with something different in her eyes. People said she could see what no one else could. She read cards, used an old crystal ball, and sometimes talked to herself in the middle of the room. But the strange thing was that, somehow, everything she said came true. She never charged for her readings. She only did it to help others. And despite what many thought, there was nothing dark about her. On the contrary, she was calm, kind, and seemed to carry a peace that no one could understand. But sometimes, that peace would turn into silence, and on those days, something bad always happened. I remember what she told me when I was little. If you ever smell cigarette smoke in a house where no one smokes, someone close is about to die. I laughed at it, of course, until the day she herself smelled it. At that time, the Ouija board was becoming popular. Everyone wanted to play with it, including our family. We used it during the day, as if it were just a game. My grandfather, always the joker, would push the pointer to trick others, pretending the spirits were speaking through him. Sometimes he even guessed the winning horse at the races, but it was as if the board never allowed profit. Whenever he bet, the horse would lose, or come in second. Then, one day, the spirit introduced itself. It said it was a boy, a distant relative. It told us he had died not long ago, a fall from a church wall, a tragic accident. Everyone went silent. My grandfather laughed, but my grandmother did not. She stared at the board, as if she knew this wasn't a joke. For weeks, the spirit answered simple questions, everyday things, trivial warnings, until the day it saved my uncle's life. The session was almost over when the pointer moved quickly, writing, "Look at the window now." My grandfather looked and saw the little baby leaning out of the lower floor window. If it hadn't been for that warning, he would have fallen. After that, everyone began to respect the board. But the boy, the spirit, seemed to change. One day, during a calm session, he wrote something different. "I am leaving now," my grandmother asked. "Where to?" "I have to help someone. Will you come back?" "Yes, when? I will let you know." And so, he disappeared. No movement on the board. No sign. No dreams, no smells, Months turned into years, and nothing, until the night when it all began again. That night began like any other, silent and seemingly ordinary. My grandmother slept deeply, while my grandfather stayed awake, reading in the dim light of the room. The clock neared midnight, and the wind softly tapped against the windows, casting shadows that danced across the walls. But something was different. Something heavy, almost tangible, hung in the air. Suddenly, there was a sound, a light knock, almost timid, on the nightstand. My grandfather furrowed his brow. He tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wood expanding, or perhaps the wind. But the knocking continued, now firmer. One tap, then another, and another, each louder than the last. As if someone were calling, demanding attention. His heart raced. He tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped his throat, almost choked by fear. "Joan, Joan." My grandmother slept soundly. Nothing woke her easily. He hesitated, hand trembling, wondering whether to nudge her or wait. But the knocking persisted, insistent and almost desperate. Each strike on the table seemed to carry a weight that time itself could not explain. His mind began to race. Memories of the past surfaced. The Ouija board. The boy. The warning that had saved my uncle. A shiver ran down his spine. What if it was him? The spirit had returned, fulfilling the promise it had made years ago. But why? And for whom? He froze. Each knock seemed to vibrate through the floor, through his body, filling him with a fear that mingled disbelief and reverence, until, suddenly, it all stopped. Absolute silence fell over the room. The wind ceased. The clock seemed to have forgotten to mark the hours. My grandfather felt a presence beside him, something he could not see but knew was there. A gentle chill, almost comforting, swept across the room, and then a sense of peace so intense it confused his fear. It was as if someone had completed their mission and was now about to leave, leaving only a whisper in the air. "It's all right." The next morning, my grandmother woke as if nothing had happened, as though the night had been ordinary. But my grandfather knew the truth. Something, or someone, had visited the room, something he could not explain, but that would forever change his perception of the world. The Ouija board, now tucked away in the drawer, felt more like a relic than a toy, an object capable of connecting lives, warning of danger, and sometimes saving those in peril. Over time, he realized there were no more signs of the boy, no knocks, no messages, no appearances, but the memory of that night remained vivid, the fear, the tension, and the certainty that not everything that disappears is truly lost. I felt the weight of the night before I even realized the passage of time. There was something in the air, a silence that didn't want to be just silence, as if the very air had turned heavy, dense with expectation. I moved slowly, almost reptilian, every muscle alert to something I couldn't name. A hole before me began to reveal itself, tall, narrow, yet somehow widening, not in height but in breadth, drawing a darkness so deep it seemed to absorb everything around it. A blackness like ink, pure, barren, bottomless. I looked at it, shoulders recoiling, neck bending, chin stretching forward, feeling my lips swell in part, as if they needed to inhale courage from the air itself. From the hole came nothing, no shape, no outline, no point, nothing I could seize with my eyes or my mind. It was an abyss of emptiness, a nothing so absolute that I knew, with the certainty that only despair can bring, that I would never reach its bottom, the bottom of nothingness. Each glance cast into that darkness seemed to sink into me, not into something outside, and yet I remained there, motionless, waiting, because a door, especially a door that locks, never opens without reason, and if something was on the other side, something that held logic, perhaps it could ease the anguish burning in my clenched parchment-dry hands. The lamp flickered above me, its trembling light casting shadows that danced on the walls and twisted as if alive. I sensed the fatigue of the lamp, the way it surrendered to time, ready to die out at any moment, but it didn't matter. I had to face it. The waiting was crueler than any visible threat. It was the void consuming me, the certainty that something might come, or perhaps never would, and still, my mind insisted on imagining the worst. I decided to act. It was vital to prevent the thing that refused to appear from reaching me. I moved with the slowness of a burdened reptile, each step calculated, feeling the soft carpet beneath my feet, cotton under my soles. I walked with a mix of anxiety and resolve toward the door. It stood there, solid. The latch closed an obstacle that reason called harmless, but fear did not. I shut my eyes, took a deep breath, and threw myself at the door. I pulled, I pushed, feeling the tongue of the latch under my fingers. I gripped it tightly with one hand, resisting any pressure that might come from outside though. Rationally, I knew nothing did. With the other, I twisted, shoved, until I heard the click that sealed my temporary victory. The door was firm, the barrier intact. I leaned against the frame, triumphant, feeling a brief relief. I returned to bed, exhausted. My head sank into the pillow, but rest never came. My body was weary, yet my mind refused to quiet the storm. I felt internal tingling, burning across dry skin, as if each cell begged for sleep. But the infernal symphony continued within my skull, a wide wave, a noisy fluttering, a dance of dead leaves swirling without purpose. A metal hat seemed to tighten around my head, a ring of steel spikes crushing my skull. My eyes grew larger, swelling like rubber balls inflated by relentless breath, and I feared they might burst from their sockets, already too small to contain them. But slowly, the breath reversed its course, shrinking my eyes just enough that I could still see the door. The cursed door I had shut so carefully now stood before me once more, slowly, inexorably, like the lid of a tomb. The black rectangle expanded further and further, revealing depths that looked like endless graves. My body reacted with physical terror. My hands twisted, every nerve quivered, and a rasping sound escaped my throat without control. The lamp, drained of oil, exhaled its final sigh and died, plunging everything into absolute darkness. I was alone, and yet I felt invisible presences. Silent specters watching, waiting. The night promised no end, and I knew that tomorrow would be nothing more than a continuation of the nightmare now, inhabiting both my body and my mind. The silence after the lamp went out was more suffocating than any noise could ever be. Each heartbeat seemed to echo through the darkness, and I could feel it in my neck, my shoulders, in every fiber of my body. The door still loomed before me, slow, far too slow for human patience to endure. Every inch of its movement seemed to tear at reality itself, turning the air into something viscous that clung to my skin. I wanted to scream, but no voice came. I tried to move, but my legs were made of lead, my feet sinking into the carpet, as if gravity had chosen that spot to double its weight. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm a mind spinning like an untamed mill. I remembered logic, reason, but there was no logic in that door, in that abyss spreading before me. The void was not mere absence. It was an active presence, one that sucked in air and hope alike. Slowly, I opened my eyes again. The black rectangle seemed wider than yesterday, deeper than any human imagination could bear, and still, it remained motionless, yet somehow advancing as if it had a will of its own, as if it breathed silently, commanding the night. A sharp coldness coursed through my veins, bringing with it a terror that mixed with the thrill of the unknown. Every step I tried to take seemed to drag reality itself behind me, as if the entire world clung to my shoes, resisting any attempt to move forward. The lamp, now completely dead, offered no refuge. I felt the damp, heavy air filling my lungs, and every breath seemed to swallow small fragments of sanity. I began to grope for the door with trembling hands, trying to feel the wood, the metal of the latch, anything that might anchor me to reality. The contact was firm, but it didn't bring comfort. On the contrary, it conveyed a silent resistance, a mute challenge that made me swallow hard. It was a barrier, yes, but not against the world, against myself, against something I could already feel pulsing in the darkness, something that didn't need to reveal itself to dominate every inch of my body. My heart quickened. The mental iron hat, that constant pressure around my skull, tightened further, as though its steel points were ready to pierce the bone. Every sound was amplified, the creak of the carpet beneath my feet, the trembling in my own hands. Even my breathing echoed like thunder in invisible caverns. It was impossible to tell reality from the perception of fear, and that made each movement an almost impossible act of courage. I shut my eyes again and tried to force reason. A closed door, especially one locked, only opens for something. Something needed to cross it, but what was that something, and why did it take so long? I felt an urgent need to act, to move, a primal instinct for survival. Every fiber of my being screamed, "Don't stand still." Yet every attempt to move was crushed by the weight of the very air. I decided to act. With slowness, a reptilian cadence, I rose from the floor. The soft carpet beneath my feet offered a strange mix of safety and discomfort. I advanced toward the door, feeling every texture of wood and metal. My hands, clenched and tense, trembled almost imperceptibly. I pulled at the door, pushed, pressed against the latch, trying to ensure that nothing could pass through. I heard the familiar click, but it brought no relief, only the realization that my effort was nothing more than a temporary gesture against something greater. I went back to bed, but the pillow offered no rest. The infernal symphony in my head continued, dizzying spins, dances of dry leaves, wide waves of invisible noise. It was as if the darkness itself were alive, swirling, twisting, pressing against my skull. The imaginary iron hat did not relent. My eyes, still swollen from the ceaseless pressure, searched for a point of reference, any sign that I wasn't completely lost. And then, there it was again, the door, turning once more, slow, inexorable, revealing its long black rectangle, wider and deeper each time. A rasp escaped my throat. My hands twisted in agony, trying to grasp something that offered no real resistance. And at the same time, the sense of something approaching grew stronger, as if the darkness had gained form, pulsing with its own life. I wanted to scream, but no voice came. The void absorbed everything. The night felt eternal, and the sensation of invisible, silent, omnipresent watchers pressed against me from all sides. My entire body trembled. Every nerve burned. Every fiber felt ready to tear apart. Yet I remained there, facing the unknown, the door, the black hole, waiting, knowing that perhaps morning would never come. The air seemed to have turned into something solid, thick, and sticky to my skin, and making every movement an almost unbearable effort. My arms felt as heavy as if they were submerged in lead. My feet sank into the carpet that once felt soft but now seemed hostile. The door kept opening, slowly and inexorably, and with every millimeter that revealed itself, I felt as though the abyss was breathing, absorbing my very essence. A shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't cold, but presence pure and undeniable. I looked at my clenched hands and saw the skin stretched too tightly, the fingers twisting involuntarily. Every joint screamed in pain. But it wasn't just physical pain, it was the weight of the unknown, crushing every thought, every memory, every fragment of logic that still remained. I wanted to close my eyes, to hide, to vanish, but something inside me pushed me to look. The door, the darkness, the black void. I had to face it. I walked toward it again, my knees almost buckling under the weight of exhaustion and fear. The carpet beneath my feet seemed to pulse, its soft threads now like invisible tentacles holding me back, slowing every step. The click of the latch, echoing from somewhere distant, was the only familiar sound amid the madness. But even that sound wasn't entirely comforting. It had a strange quality, and alive like a scream trapped inside the wood of the door. As I drew closer, I felt the iron hat pressing against my skull again. Every breath of air seemed to amplify the sensation. Every heartbeat was a loud drum reverberating inside my head. My brain danced in waves of terror, spinning, dizzy, like dry leaves dragged by an invisible and brutal wind. I tried to think, to rationalize, but every thought seemed to be sucked into the void opening before me. My eyes throbbed, pulsing like rubber balls filled with air that came from nowhere. I feared they might burst at any moment, and yet I had to look. Slowly, I opened them and stared into the black rectangle. It kept expanding, its depths growing wider, as if it wanted to swallow everything around it. The darkness seemed to have texture, weight, will of its own. It was alive, and I could feel it move, touching me without truly showing itself. A low sound, almost imperceptible, rose from the void. It wasn't the sound of wind, nor wood, nor metal. It was something older, crueler, death rattle of forgotten existences. My body reacted on its own. I twisted my hands, hunched my shoulders, tried to shield my head, but there was no safe place. The door was open, the darkness was watching, and I realized that any physical defense was useless. I took a deep breath and tried to focus. I remembered every door I had ever closed in my life, every barrier I had built to protect myself from visible and invisible threats. But this was no ordinary threat. It was absence and presence at once. It was emptiness and weight. It was the certainty that human reason has limits in. I was touching them now, cruelly and inevitably. The air grew denser. Every breath turned to stone. Every step became an eternity. The door creaked wider, each centimeter a sentence. My stomach churned, my head pounded, my legs trembled, but I couldn't step back. Something inside me, older than I was, more instinctive than thought, pushed me to face it. The darkness began to form patterns, subtle, almost imperceptible. A line, then another, then a point that appeared and vanished again. My brain desperately tried to decode, to understand, to name it, but it was impossible. It was a living nothing, a void that stared back in with every gaze. I felt as if the night itself had consciousness. My hands were slick with sweat, slipping against the wood of the door. My heart felt ready to burst from my chest. Every beat echoed like thunder in the absolute silence. My entire body trembled, and the rasping breath began to escape my throat, again hoarse, involuntary, desperate. I didn't know if I was alive or if I had already become part of that void, but there was something more, something imminent. A final instant of comprehension, a last spark of awareness, told me that the door wasn't just wood, wasn't just metal. It was a passage to something I couldn't yet fully understand. And in that instant, I knew the night was only beginning. The horror was not yet complete. Every second of waiting, every movement of the door, every breath of the darkness was pushing me toward a limit I never imagined could exist. My body no longer obeyed reason. My mind tried, but madness was faster. I stood at the edge of the impossible, and I knew that any misstep could be my last. Time seemed to have stretched, each second elongating into an unbearable eternity. I was there, trapped between the impossible and the inevitable. The door before me rotated, slow, inexorable, revealing more and more of the black rectangle that seemed bottomless. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to yield. Every fiber of my being was on full alert, every muscle tense as if even the slightest relaxation could mean disappearing. The air around me pulsed. It was as if it breathed with me, as if my own life were intertwined with that living darkness. A sharp cold ran down my spine and up into my skull, squeezing me like an invisible iron fist. The infernal symphony in my head became unbearable. Cracks, echoes of voices and sounds that could not exist. Every heartbeat reverberated through my body like an ancestral drum, warning me that something was about to happen. I tried to move, but my legs seemed trapped, the floor liquid with fear. My hands, twisting on their own, searched for any point of contact, any sensation of reality, and then I realized it was no longer just the door that threatened me, no longer just the black void. It was the very space around me, the air, the floor, the furniture, all becoming extensions of whatever was coming. It was the world trying to swallow me, pulling me into something with no shape, only presence. Involuntary rasp escaped my throat, hoarse and desperate. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to regain some control, some spark of reason, but the mind would not respond. The darkness seemed to perceive my effort and react. I felt a weight on my chest, a pressure making normal breathing impossible. Each inhale was painful, each exhale seemed to drag something within me, something I could not name. When I opened my eyes, the door was wider than it had ever been. The black rectangle grew as if it had a will of its own, revealing impossible depths that swallowed light, matter, space, and time. I tried to retreat, but my feet would not obey. I tried to scream, but my voice died before it emerged. All that remained was to stare, powerless, at that which should not exist. The mental iron hat pressed even harder against my head, compressing, crushing. My eyes pulsed like rubber balls, swelling with the constant breath of darkness. The fear was so intense it hurt physically, burned, consumed every rational thought. I tried to resist, to close the door again, to push, to press, but it was useless. The force on the other side could not be contained by wood or metal. It was something greater, bolder, something that had inhabited the void long before I existed. I felt my muscles give way. Reality seemed to fragment, every part of the room distorted, every shadow moved with a will of its own. The door was now fully open, and the abyss ahead seemed to swallow everything, even my own consciousness. I tried to resist, but it was too late. A final rasp escaped my throat, almost a whisper of life lost in the immensity of darkness. The sense of pressure lessened for an instant, only for me to realize my total impotence. There was no escape, no explanation, only the living presence of nothingness, consuming everything. My body was paralyzed, my mind crumbling in absolute terror. And then, the nothing took form, not visible, not material, but felt in every fiber of my being. A touch that was not a touch, a weight that was not a weight, a presence that did not need to exist to crush the essence of life. I tried to rise, but there was no strength. Every attempt to resist was futile. I was at the mercy of something I could not comprehend, something coming from the very abyss of reality, nothing with consciousness, a void hungry for existence. And yet, within this absolute terror, I felt something almost perversely ironic. The latch of the door, the key turning. I had done everything right, yet nothing could stop the inevitable. Then came total, complete, absolute darkness. An endless instant where there was no me, no door, no room, only the void and the presence. Every cell screamed, every thought dissolved. I felt my body lose all tension, consciousness fading, and when morning finally came, the neighbors found the room silent, cold, with the body collapsed on the floor. The key had turned, the latch tried, but nothing had ever entered the forehead. I was dead, but the sensation I had experienced, the presence of nothingness, the consciousness of the abyss remained beyond any life. The story ended, yes, but the terror did not. It lingers in the air, in the memory of anyone daring to imagine what it means to face something that cannot be seen, yet exists absolutely. If you are listening or reading this, know, some doors should never be opened, some abysses have no bottom, and some presences live on the edge between the impossible and the real, waiting for the moment when someone, like me, dares to confront them. When we moved to the old farmhouse in Rhode Island, in the biting cold of January 1971, my wife Caroline and I were full of expectations. The property was spacious, with 10 rooms and spaces that seemed to promise comfort and tranquility. We had 5 young daughters, and we imagined that the new house would be the perfect place to start a new life. What we didn't know, what no one had told us, was that the house carried centuries of secrets, of pain, and of presences that would not rest. In the first few days, I noticed something strange. It wasn't something you could immediately see, but something you could feel. The air seemed heavier, charged, as if each breath required extra effort. Caroline also mentioned the sensation, but we thought it was just the adjustment to the move and the harsh winter with its biting winds. The girls, however, quickly began to show signs of unease. Sleep didn't come easily. They would wake crying, claiming to hear voices and laments coming from the walls, whispers they couldn't understand. But that filled them with fear. At first, we ignored it, thinking they were dreams or childish imagination. But the events quickly escalated. The voices became clearer, almost audible even to us adults. Paintings fell for no reason, doors slammed shut on their own, and whirlwinds of dust appeared in completely closed rooms. The feeling that we were not alone became inescapable. I began to notice a strong, almost nauseating smell coming from the basement, something that could not be explained by mold or old wooden boxes. Carolyn constantly felt shivers, and the girls, increasingly terrified, hid in their rooms. My first reaction was to try to rationalize everything. I researched the property's history. I discovered that many generations of the same family had lived there, and that numerous tragedies had occurred on the site. Suicides, drownings, murders. Every part of the house seemed to carry memories that time had not erased. It was shocking to realize we were living in a house that was practically a memorial of deaths and suffering. The sense of heaviness I had first felt intuitively began to manifest more concretely. The supernatural manifestations began to focus on Carolyn. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed suddenly, and shadows seemed to cross the rooms almost consciously, as if choosing when and where to appear. One presence, more intense than all the others, seemed fixed on her, watching her with an attention that left us breathless. In further research, I discovered the name Bathsheba Sherman, a woman who, according to local stories, practiced dark rituals and had committed suicide on that same property. Legend said her spirit would not rest, and that she passed from generation to generation, marking those who entered her home. The fear began to grow palpably. I watched Caroline turn pale, her eyes wide, while the girls stared at empty corners with a terror that was not childish, but primal. Each night seemed longer than the one before, and the house, though large, felt smaller as Bathsheba's presence became more evident. The heavy air, the inexplicable cold, the whispers, and the movement of objects all pointed to the same conclusion. We were not dealing with mere coincidences or childish fears. After weeks, there was no doubt. We needed help. We called the Warrens. Known for their work as exorcists and paranormal investigators, the presence in the house was too intense for us. The rituals began with prayers, symbols, and attempts to expel the spirits. But even with their experience, the Warrens admitted that the force inhabiting the house was ancient, resistant, and vengeful. Each attempt seemed to anger the spirits even more, increasing episodes of levitating beds, inexplicable screams, and shadows crossing walls. It was in this growing climate of tension that I realized we had no choice. The house, which had promised comfort and a new beginning, had transformed into an invisible battlefield. Every room carried stories of death and suffering, and Bathsheba's spirit seemed determined to make us know that we were living inside her memory, inside her wrath. Caroline and I looked at each other, silent, understanding that this winter, this home, would offer us no peace. The nights became unbearable. Every shadow, every creak of the house, seemed to take on a life of its own. I would wake with my heart racing, feeling something invisible moving through the hallways, watching, waiting. The girls cried silently, trembling in their rooms, while Caroline tried to comfort them, but even she seemed to succumb to the pressure of what inhabited those walls. The cold didn't come only from poorly sealed windows or Rhode Island's harsh winter. It was a cold that penetrated to the bones, raising goosebumps and tensing muscles, as if something was touching without actually making contact. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps upstairs. The boards creaked irregularly, heavily, deliberately. At first, I thought it was one of the girls, but soon realized they were sleeping, huddled under the covers, breathing softly. Caroline was also asleep, or pretending, because her body was still, yet her pale face betrayed tension. I held my breath, trying to listen better, and then the footsteps stopped, but not the silence. The air was heavy, as if breathing on its own, and I felt a gaze pass through the wall, fixed on me. Soon objects began moving on their own. Chairs slid across the floor, doors slammed open with force. Paintings fell from the walls, cracking on the floor. I ran to the kitchen to grab something for protection, but there was no point in fighting something invisible. All I could do was watch, observe, and survive. The girls screamed, and Caroline held their hands, trying to convey reassurance, but I knew we were all powerless. Something ancient, powerful, and vengeful inhabited our home, and we were intruders in its memory. That's when we discovered the true story of Bathsheba Sherman. Researching records and speaking with longtime neighbors, we learned that she had lived on that land long before us. There were accounts of dark practices, sacrifices, and rituals that had marked her forever, and her death had not ended her presence. On the contrary, she seemed to remain, harboring resentment, watching every new resident of the house. The sense that Caroline was her specific target grew with each passing night. She became frightened, weakened, as if absorbing the malevolent energy that inhabited every wall, every corner. At a certain point, the house seemed to come alive. Stairs creaked even when no one stepped on them. Doors slammed and locked themselves, and Bathsheba's presence seemed to follow Caroline throughout the house. I felt the air change as she passed through the halls, a weight pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The girls began calling for me or their mother, but even our screams weren't enough to break the atmosphere of terror. It was as if we were living inside a trap, and every wall, every object, was part of an invisible plan of malice. We called the Warrens, hoping they could provide a solution. When they arrived, there was only a slight, temporary relief, but nothing that truly expelled the spirits. Rituals were carried out carefully, prayers recited, symbols drawn to ward off evil, but Bathsheba seemed resistant, silently mocking our impotence. Every attempt at expulsion was followed by even more intense episodes. Beds levitated, screams grew louder, and shadows passed like ghosts through the hallways, persistent and relentless. On several nights, I saw Caroline paralyzed, eyes fixed on invisible points, murmuring words that made no sense. It seemed that Bathsheba herself subtly possessed her, trying to control her, or at least leave her utterly terrified. The girls gradually refused to sleep alone, trembling at every sound, and one, trying to protect them, realized the house was not just a backdrop for supernatural events, but a living, conscious, and aggressive presence. With each passing day, the tension increased. There was no rest, no safety. Every night was a test of endurance. Every shadow a reminder that we were living in a place that did not want us. The property that had promised to be our home had become an invisible battlefield, and our only goal became survival without losing our sanity. The sense of fear became routine, yet it did not diminish. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that it would not end as long as we were there. The spirit of Bathsheba was with us, watching, waiting, exerting her power over every detail of our lives. The events began to intensify to an almost unbearable degree. The nights seemed to stretch endlessly, as if time itself had stopped to force us to face each moment of fear. Every shadow, every sound, every invisible step was amplified by the silence of the house. The girls no longer slept alone, clinging to Caroline or me, whispering words of fear that only we could hear. One night, as I tried to escort one of my daughters to her room, I felt something gently push me from behind. It wasn't a hand, nor an object. It was just an invisible force that seemed to test my resilience. I turned around, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, yet the sense of presence was overwhelming. Every breath felt difficult, as if the air itself were being sucked away, making the environment heavy and suffocating. Carolyn began to report visioned shadows moving at the corners of her eyes, objects floating for no apparent reason, and the constant sensation of being watched by someone or something invisible, yet real. The fear she felt was tangible, and I could see it reflected in her eyes, in the trembling of her hands. The girls, increasingly haunted, began speaking of a dark-looking woman approaching them at night. According to them, her gaze was empty, piercing, and full of hatred. The intensity of the supernatural phenomena forced us to involve the Warrens again. They performed rituals, drew symbols, recited prayers, and applied techniques to try to contain what was happening. But with every attempt, something seemed to anger the presence even more. Objects began moving faster, the moans grew louder, and the sense of being watched became almost physical, as if the energy of the house had gained consciousness and reacted to our every movement. It was during one of these sessions that I realized, in a terrifying way, that Bathsheba was not merely haunting the house. She seemed to choose our deepest fears and turn them into reality. Every shadow grew denser, every sound drew closer, every wall seemed to bend, pressing us as if to crush us. The cold was sharper, cutting through the skin and into the bones. I felt my body shake uncontrollably, my mind on the verge of collapse, and the awareness that we were at the mercy of something ancient and relentless became overwhelming. One early morning, Caroline woke screaming. I ran to her room and found her paralyzed, eyes wide, fixed on an invisible point. The air seemed to vibrate around her, and I could feel an invisible pressure pushing me backward. The girls, terrified, cried silently, as if they feared that any sound could draw the presence even closer. There was no rational explanation, no logic, only pure, absolute fear filling every corner of the house. It then became clear to me that the house itself was alive. Every room, every hallway, every object seemed part of a conscious organism, projecting terror and exerting control over our bodies and minds. The screams, the whispers, the voices of children and adults all seemed orchestrated to keep us in a constant state of alert and constant terror. It was a meticulous, cruel, and relentless presence that would not allow us to rest or escape easily. I tried to protect my family, but every attempt seemed futile. Doors slammed shut on their own, objects levitated, and the furniture itself appeared to move with a will of its own. Caroline, increasingly frightened, began speaking of Bathsheba as if she were there, inside the room, breathing with her, touching her, marking her. I felt the same. The invisible presence surrounded us, pressing us, testing our physical and mental limits. There were no more peaceful nights. Every dawn brought only momentary relief, only for the following night to amplify the terror even more intensely. The girls refused to enter any room alone. Even I, an adult man, felt chills when walking through empty hallways. Bathsheba's spirit had become a constant force ever present, always vigilant. Every detail of the house could be manipulated by her. Every object, every shadow, every corridor. And it was at that point that I realized a terrifying truth. We were trapped, There was no refuge, no real protection. What attacked us was not just a shadow, a ghost, or a moving object. It was an ancient, intelligent consciousness that studied us, provoked us, and tormented us without ever fully revealing itself. And while we remained in that cursed house, every breath, every movement, every attempt to survive was a battle against something that surpassed us in power, malice, and patience. The feeling of despair had become routine. Each morning brought only the promise of another night of terror. The girls were exhausted, sleeping little or almost not at all, clinging to Caroline or me. I myself felt my body weary and my nerves on edge. The house, which had initially promised comfort and a home, had transformed into a living nightmare, each wall carrying memories of suffering and death, and Bathsheba Sherman more present than ever. We tried to continue living there, maintaining a minimal routine, but every little detail seemed to amplify the malevolent presence. Sounds that were once insignificant, the creak of floorboards, the wind at the windows, the jingle of an object now, became signs of threat. Every shadow seemed purposeful. Every room hid invisible secrets, waiting to strike when we were vulnerable. And the sense that Caroline was the primary target remained constant. Bathsheba's presence was not limited to scares or moving objects. She seemed to interact with us, manipulating fear and anxiety. The girls spoke to her, trying to understand her intentions, and in response received only visions and whispers that sent chills down their spines. One night, Caroline awoke in panic, murmuring names and phrases that made no sense, as if she were being possessed or controlled. I tried to hold her, comfort her, but I felt that my physical strength was useless against something unseen, yet entirely real. We called the Warrens again, in a last effort to save our sanity and, perhaps, our lives. They performed several rituals, incense burned, symbols were drawn, prayers recited. For a moment, it seemed there was a small relief, but the calm was deceptive. The house was not defeated. Each following night brought new phenomena, more intense and daring. Objects flew, beds levitated, doors slammed violently, and the air seemed to vibrate with an energy that crushed us. Bathsheba did not merely want to frighten. She wanted to dominate Mark, and show us that we were intruders in her domain. At that point, the decision became inevitable. There were no more rituals that worked, no explanations, no refuge. The house would not allow us to live in peace. Every family member was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. Caroline could not sleep. The girls were traumatized, and I felt my own mind beginning to bend under the constant pressure of invisible terror. The only safe way out was to leave the property. In 1980, after nearly a decade living under the constant threat of the supernatural, we made the painful decision to leave the farm. We packed our belongings with trembling hands, casting fearful glances at every corner of the house, aware that we were leaving something behind we would never forget. As we stepped out, the feeling was strange, relief mixed with lingering fear, as if the house were still watching us, guarding its memories and grudges. Even after we moved, the impact of the experience continued to haunt us. The girls carried vivid memories of each night of terror, each vision, each whisper of Bathsheba. Caroline and I remembered every detail with almost painful precision. The shadows, the moving objects, the sense of being constantly watched. It was impossible to ignore that something, far beyond human understanding, had been part of our lives during those years. The Perrin family case became famous precisely because of these events, reported by us and corroborated by the Warrens. Even today, when I think of that house, I feel the weight of that presence. Bathsheba Sherman was not just a legend or a story to scare children. She wasn't, perhaps, still isn't ancient, resilient, conscious force, inhabiting that land and observing anyone who dares enter her domain. Reflecting on everything we experienced, I realized that some experiences cannot be fully explained or understood. The fear we felt was not merely psychological, it was a tangible reality, a constant pressure reminding us of the limits of human reason in the face of the supernatural. The lesson we learned is simple and terrifying. Some houses are not just physical structures, but receptacles of memories, energies, and presences that cannot be controlled. Even today, as I tell our story, a shiver runs through my body. It is impossible not to imagine Bathsheba watching, waiting, silently laughing at the fear she still provokes in those who know her name. The farm in Rhode Island is not just a house. It is a reminder that ancient, invisible forces surround us, forces that we often cannot comprehend or control. And that is precisely why we left the property. Not out of fear of ordinary ghosts, but out of respect for something that exceeds our capacity to understand. Leaving the house was the only way to ensure we stayed alive. And even so, we know it remains, as it always has, ready for those who dare cross its threshold. The doors swing open, and I can hardly believe what I'm seeing. There's a table in the center of the room, surrounded by 10 chairs, exactly like the one at the bar. My mind reels. How can this be? Surely I must be dreaming. Tracy turns toward me, but her face is grotesquely distorted. She is the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Her smile stretches unnaturally, her eyes glinting with malice. "Hello, Lily," she says, her voice chillingly sweet, yet dripping with venom. "We're so glad you came. We're all here. We're all celebrating. Come, sit with us." A shiver runs down my spine, but instead of fleeing, I move toward the table. My legs feel heavy, like lead, each step echoing in the silence of the room. I glance at Dave, desperate, and whisper, "Help me." He turns slowly, and my stomach drops. His face, once familiar, is now unrecognizable. White powder covers his skin, and his lips are blackened, curling back to reveal jagged fangs. But it's his eyes that freeze me in place. They are no longer the warm, familiar orbs that once made my heart race. They are monstrous, demonic, with molten orange orbs erupting from their depths, spewing jets of fiery liquid. The sensual gaze that had once sparked desire now feels like an instrument of torture. "Hello, darling," Dave intones, his voice warped and echoing unnaturally. "Welcome back. We've been waiting for you." I stumble back, trying to comprehend. What is this?" I whisper, my voice barely audible. From the corner of my vision, the Uber driver approaches. His hands are skeletal knobby, reaching toward me with unnatural stiffness. "You don't remember me," he hisses. "Think carefully. You should have come. Without me, you wouldn't be here. You stole my job." I freeze, recognition dawning like ice in my veins. It was he who had told me about the position in the first place. He had trusted me, believed we were friends, and I greedily, carelessly took what was meant for him. I swallow hard, trying to explain, "I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to succeed. I thought it would make me happy." But the room is alive with their silent judgment. Every face around the table is terrifying. Their eyes, their twisted expressions, the warped reflections of my past mistakes, they are all pointing to me. I realize with a gut-punching clarity that every person here represents someone. I've wronged every slight, every betrayal, every careless moment. I glance at Dave again, pleading, I still care about you. I didn't know Tracy. I'm sorry." Tracy's laughter explodes across the room, shrill and piercing. My ears feel as if they might split. "You thought you could sleep with my boyfriend, but he's mine. He always will be." She screams, the words like daggers. Dave laughs next, a cold, cruel sound. "Oh, you fool. Thinking you could rise without consequences. You didn't look where you are now. This is what you deserve." I struggle to focus on the faces. They are all shrouded in darkness. Shadows cast over them like living smoke. Only their eyes burn with that malevolent, molten intensity. My throat goes dry. I whisper, almost to myself, "What happened to Jason?" My mind tries to stall, but the answer is inevitable. The HR woman, whose name I've long forgotten, leans forward. Her eyes glint with a sickly orange ectoplasm. "Remember the papers you signed?" she croons. "I told you to read them, but you didn't, did you?" She lifts the last document I signed, pointing to the fine print beneath my signature. My eyes widen in horror. It says I agreed to sell my soul. Her smile widens, the glow of her eyes pulsating as she continues. "Jason, oh, he's not dead. Show her." A figure dressed entirely in black turns toward me. "Hello," he says, voice low but cutting. "I'm here because of you. I know it was you who pushed me off the roof. Don't lie." His eyes blaze even brighter than Dave's. Molten plasma shooting out in waves of unrelenting fire. Panic claws at me. My legs move of their own accord as I run, heart hammering, lungs burning. They are all coming for me. Jason's laughter cuts through the chaos, deep and victorious. "Don't worry," Jason calls out, his voice curling through the air like smoke. "I've got you now." I stumble down the long, twisting hallway, every step feeling like I'm moving through thick mud. The air itself seems alive, pulsing, resisting my flight. Shadows writhe along the walls, stretching and curling into grotesque shapes that seem to reach for me. The floor beneath me groans, echoing every heartbeat, every hurried breath. My mind screams for logic, for escape, but reason has long since abandoned me. Behind me, I hear the distorted chorus of voices, Tracy's high-pitched cackle, Dave's guttural laughter, Jason's taunting tones, and the skeletal Uber driver's hiss. They're gaining faster, closer, each step. I take only seems to make the air thicker, heavier, suffocating. My lungs burn. My legs shake violently, refusing to obey. Yet I am propelled forward by a primitive, desperate need to survive. I round a corner and slam into a wall. There's nowhere to hide. My fingers scrabble against the surface, searching for leverage. For a doorway, for anything. The whispers begin again soft at first, then rising into an overwhelming roar that seems to echo inside my skull. Every secret I've kept, every betrayal, every misstep in life, it's all being dragged into this room. Into this moment, exposed and weaponized. The HR woman's voice cuts through the chaos, crystalline and chilling. "You chose this. Lily, every decision, every ambition, every selfish act you signed for it. Even if you didn't read the fine print." Her ectoplasmic eyes flare, and the walls around me ripple, as if reality itself is bending to her will. I try to cover my ears, but it's useless. The sound penetrates bone and mind alike. Then I see Jason. He's not human, not anymore. His face is fractured, a mask of black and orange fire, molten veins writhing beneath the surface. He grins, wide and impossible, the glow from his eyes illuminating the distorted faces of those behind him. Tracy is there, hovering slightly above the ground, her laughter slicing the silence into jagged shards. Dave follows, every movement inhuman, contorted. A grotesque parody of the man I once knew. Even the Uber driver, skeletal and silent, mirrors their movements with a terrifying precision. I run, desperate, my hands sliding along walls that seem to stretch and twist endlessly. Hallways multiply, corners fold in impossible angles. Ceilings dip and rise, and the floor breathes beneath me. Every familiar landmark from the office, the bar, my apartment, even the streets outside, have dissolved into a shifting nightmare landscape. I am trapped in a purgatory of my own making, a labyrinth where my sins take form and pursue me relentlessly. "Lily," Tracy calls, her voice simultaneously intimate and grotesque. "Sit, join us. You belong here now." I shake my head violently, pushing forward. The table looms ahead in the distance, 10 chairs casting long, black shadows that writhe like living serpents. My heart slams against my ribcage as I realize I cannot outrun them, not physically, not mentally. The very space around me is their extension, their tool of punishment. They don't just want me trapped. They want me broken, reshaped by fear and guilt. Jason steps closer, each movement slow but precise, deliberate. His voice, a distorted echo of his former self, hisses in my mind. "You think you can escape what you did. You cannot. You chose, and now you pay." I feel the walls closing in. The ceiling drops. The floor ripples. My own hands, reaching out for support, are met with resistance, as if gravity itself has turned against me. Every step forward is agony, every breath a battle, and yet some part of me refuses to surrender. I fight, clawing, stumbling, screaming in silent terror as the room around me distorts further. The HR woman's smile widens. "Do you understand now? The soul you signed away, it's not just a document, it's a promise. And promises have consequences." Her fingers stretch impossibly long, reaching toward me, and I flinch back. But there is nowhere to retreat. Suddenly, I'm forced to stop. The corridor ends in a vast, empty space, the table of horrors floating in the center. Every chair occupied by twisted, molten-eyed versions of those I wronged. The orange glow from their eyes bathes the room, pulsating like a heartbeat, syncing with my own terrified pulse. Tracy's laughter, Dave's guttural growl, Jason's triumphant sneer, they echo and multiply, merging into a deafening chorus. I realize with bone-deep certainty that the nightmare is no longer just around. Midst inside me, my guilt, my ambition, my lies, every misstep has given shape and power to these entities. They are born from me, as much as they are chasing me. And now, the chase has reached its inevitable end. Jason steps forward, and the room seems to shrink, compressing me against the invisible walls of fear and memory. Tracy floats above the table, her shadow stretching impossibly long, casting darkness across the entire floor. Dave tilts his head, molten eyes blazing, and the Uber driver raises his skeletal hands, the sound of cracking bones reverberating through the space. I am surrounded. There is nowhere left to run. Every instinct screams escape, but my mind is paralyzed by terror. The whispers, the laughter, the molten stares, they converge into a single, inescapable truth. I am completely exposed, utterly vulnerable, and entirely at their mercy. And then, it stops. For a fraction of a second, the cacophony of sound and motion freezes. The air is still thick and suffocating. I realize that this silence is not relief, it is anticipation. They are waiting for my reaction, for my surrender. Every muscle in my body tenses. My heart races. I know that one wrong move, one flicker of fear, and the nightmare will consume me entirely. I take a trembling step forward, toward the table, toward the impossible, toward the judgment that awaits. And in that moment, I understand that some things, some debts, some sins cannot be avoided. They must be faced. The room waits, watching, the glow of molten eyes piercing through me, judging me, testing me, knowing I cannot hide. This is the final act. This is the reckoning, and no matter what happens next, I know one thing with terrifying clarity. There is no escape from what we owe to the past, no matter how much we wish it away. I'm your dream companion, the one who helps you relax after a long day before you drift off to sleep. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now? What time is it there? Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable in bed, and come with me, because the night is just beginning, and this story is all yours. I've worked in mines most of my life. You stop noticing the darkness after a while. It becomes something like a companion, something patient, waiting for you to stop pretending you're in control. I used to tell myself the earth wasn't alive, that it didn't care if we carved through its ribs for profit. But sometimes, in the deep hours of a shift, when the machines quieted and the only thing left was the sound of your own breathing, you could almost feel it listening. We were a small crew this time, just 6 of us, assigned to an expansion site roughly 2 miles beneath the surface. The company called it Chamber 9, though it looked like any other tunnel run, silent and endless. My partner Davy was the newest addition, fresh out of training, still eager enough to joke about ghosts and cave monsters. I liked him for that. He made the dark seem less final. The first few days were uneventful. We drilled, we blasted, we reinforced. The usual, but on the 4th day, I started hearing something that didn't belong. It wasn't the echo of tools or machinery, it was softer, rhythmic. 3 dull thuds, faint and distant, like someone tapping from behind a wall of stone. I figured it was just sound distortion. Down here, noises travel strangely. Sometimes they loop back at you, tricking your ears. But the pattern, that's what bothered me. It felt deliberate. That night I asked Davy if he'd heard anything. He looked at me with that smirk of his, the one that said I was overthinking it. Probably just the drills from the next shaft, he said. But we both knew there was no next shaft. Chamber 9 was isolated. We were the only ones working that deep. The next day, the tapping came again. Louder this time, closer. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. I stopped working, holding my breath, waiting for it to repeat. When it did, I realized it was coming from below my boots. I crouched, pressing my gloved hand to the ground, and felt a faint vibration, steady and intentional. It was as if someone or something was striking the rock from beneath, I told the foreman. He shrugged it off, said it was a shift in the bedrock. A settling noise, that's what they always called it when they didn't want to scare the crew. Settling, like the earth just needed to get comfortable before swallowing us whole. By the end of the week, 2 more men reported strange sounds, not just knocking muffled voices, whispers too low to understand. We even shut down the generators one night, just to prove it wasn't mechanical. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on, and in that silence, clear as a heartbeat, came the tapping again. Davy volunteered to check the lower access tunnel. He was confident, almost eager, carrying the portable light and a grin that looked forced in the helmet glow. I followed behind him, the narrow passage pressing in around us. The air was colder there, damp, smelling of iron and dust. After 50 yards, we reached a dead end, a wall of uncut rock where future work was supposed to begin. That's when the sound came again. Not from ahead, but from inside the wall. A slow, deliberate pounding. Davy looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "Someone's in there," he whispered. "Impossible," I said. "That section's never been opened." But the knocks continued, steady as a pulse. He raised his hammer. "If there's an air pocket, maybe." Before he could finish, the wall shuddered. Just once, but strong enough to make dust rain from the ceiling. The light flickered, and in that flicker, I thought I saw something shift behind the stone. A shape, or maybe a shadow. It was gone before I could focus. We backed away. Neither of us spoke the rest of the shift. Later, when we returned to the main chamber, the others said they hadn't heard a thing, that it was probably pressure equalizing. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to. But that night, when I finally lay down in the bunks near the surface elevator, I felt the vibration again, not through the ground this time, but in my chest, as if the mine had learned my heartbeat and was knocking back in perfect rhythm. It started as a faint tremor, so subtle, I thought it was just the hum of the ventilation system, but then the ground gave a low guttural moan. Every man in the shaft froze. You can tell a lot by the way silence spreads underground. When it hits, it's like the earth itself is holding its breath. We all looked at each other, flashlights trembling in the darkened, then the dust began to fall. Little flakes at first, like snow from the ceiling. Then came the rumble, collapse. Someone screamed, but the word barely escaped before the tunnel roared. The world turned white and gray. Dust swallowed the air. The ground buckled under my boots, and I was thrown against the wall. My helmet slammed into the rock. The light flickered and died. For a few endless seconds, I couldn't tell if I was upright, buried, or floating. The only thing I could hear was the scream of stone grinding against stone. When the sound stopped, it wasn't relief that filled the air, it was the absence of it. That kind of silence you feel pressing against your skull. I coughed until I could breathe again, tasting grit and blood. My flashlight flickered weakly, cutting a cone through the haze. The tunnel was unrecognizable. The main passage was gone, just a wall of broken rock and twisted steel. "Davy," I shouted, but my voice cracked. Nothing came back. I scrambled toward where he'd been moments before, but there was only daybreak rushed equipment, a fallen beam, and half of a rail line bent like wire. "Davy." No answer, just the slow drip of water seeping from somewhere unseen. I checked my comms. Dead. No signal, no static. Only the faint hum of my own breathing echoing inside the helmet. There was another shaft connected to this one, a narrow maintenance tunnel we'd used earlier that day. If I could reach it, maybe I could find another way out. Maybe he had too. I squeezed through a gap in the rubble, dragging my pack behind me. The air was thicker, the air heavier. The deeper I crawled, the more it felt like the tunnel itself was breathing. Then I heard it, 3 knocks. Soft, measured, coming from ahead. My heart nearly stopped. "Davy." No reply. Just another series of knocks, closer this time. I pressed my ear against the rock. It was cold, but the sound was unmistakable. It wasn't random. It was a rhythm, a message. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. We used that pattern sometimes during drills. It meant I'm trapped, but alive. "Hold on," I yelled. "I'm coming." I began clearing the smaller stones, tearing my gloves in the process. My hands bled, but I didn't care. The knocking continued, steady, desperate. Then, suddenly it stopped. "Davy." Nothing. I waited, counting the seconds. 10, 20, 30. Then came one single knock. Slow, deep. But this time, it wasn't coming from in front of me. It came from behind. I froze. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I turned. The tunnel behind me was empty, just dust swirling lazily in the stale air. "Who's there?" I whispered. Another knock. Louder. This one made the ground vibrate. Then, scratching, faint, irregular, like fingernails dragging along the rock. I started backing away, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to go, just a maze of tunnels and the weight of the mountain above. The light flickered again. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move, a shape just beyond the reach of the beam. Something human, but not. Then the light went out. Total darkness. I could hear my own breath, fast and shallow. I reached for my backup lamp, fumbling in the dark. My fingers found the switch. A weak glow sputtered to life. The tunnel was empty again. I swallowed hard and pressed on toward the service shaft. Every few steps, I glanced back. Every few steps, I listened. Nothing. When I finally reached the ladder leading up, I felt something like relief. I started climbing, one rung at a time. But halfway up, the metal beneath my boots began to vibrate. 3 knocks. 2 knocks. And this time, they were coming from above. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. The knocks couldn't be coming from above. The service shaft was sealed at the top. We'd welded the hatch months ago to keep it stable. But there they were again. 3 knocks. 2. I froze halfway up the ladder, hand gripping the cold steel. My helmet light shook, sending shadows crawling along the narrow walls. "Davy," I called out, my voice barely a whisper. "Is that you?" The air didn't move. No echo, no dust, no sound until another knock answered. This one, sharper, impatient. Something inside me broke. I started climbing faster, boots clanging against the rungs. metal ringing like a heartbeat. I didn't care what was up there, I just needed to get away from the tunnel, from the dark pressing around me like wet cloth. When I reached the top, the hatch was there, just as I remembered, round, ironed, and locked from the outside. I slammed my fist against it. Help anyone up there? Nothing. Only silence, and the faint vibration of something breathing on the other side. I stopped shouting. Slowly, I pressed my ear to the metal. At first, there was nothing. Then soft, deliberate, came the sound of knuckles brushing against the hatch from the other side. Not knocking, feeling. I climbed down one rung, two, and then the hatch began to turn. It didn't open fast, like something breaking in. It turned slow, steady, as if someone was on the other side taking their time. My light flickered. I couldn't move. My body refused to obey. The hatch groaned open, inch by inch, and a cloud of dust and cold air rolled down the shaft. I looked up, expecting to see light, but there was nothing. Just a rectangle of absolute blackness. Then, a hand appeared. At least, I think it was a hand. The fingers were long, too long, moving in stiff, twitching jerks, the joints bending the wrong way. They curled around the edge of the hatch and held there. No arm, no face, just that shape. Pale as limestone and trembling like it struggled against gravity itself. I couldn't breathe. The hand twitched once, twice, then began to pull downward, slow and careful, as if it was feeling its way toward me. That was enough. I let go of the ladder. The fall wasn't long, but it was brutal. I hit the ground hard, my shoulders screaming in pain. My light shattered, plunging me into darkness again. I scrambled up, half limping, half crawling, back into the main tunnel. My lungs burned with the dust. Somewhere behind me, the hatch clanged shut again, the echo following me like footsteps. For a while, I ran. I don't know how long. The tunnel curved and narrowed, the air growing colder, thicker. My mind told me I was going deeper, not out, but I couldn't stop. Then, from somewhere ahead, came a voice. Hello. It was faint, small, but human. I froze. It was Davy. It had to be. Davy, I'm here. No response. Just the echo of my own words. Davy, and then, laughter, not loud or manic, soft, like someone chuckling through a mouthful of dirt. I backed away slowly, my boots crunching over loose rock. The laughter faded, replaced again by those knocks. Closer, faster. All around me now. 3 knocks, 2. 3 knocks, 2. It wasn't coming from one spot anymore. It was echoing through the walls. From above, below, behind. Like the mine itself was repeating it. I reached for the cones again, even knowing they were dead. Anyone, please. I need extraction. I'm not alone down here. Static. Then, through the static, a voice. Low, hollow, familiar. You're late. My stomach turned. It was Davy's voice. Where are you? I asked. Silence. Then the voice again, closer. You said you'd stay with me. The tunnel lights above flickered once. Twice, then went dark, one by one, receding into blackness like a fuse burning out. The last thing I saw before my light gave out was a shape standing at the far end of the corridor. It was the right height, the right build. The helmet looked like Davy, but the way it moved wrong, slow, dragging, as if every motion was being remembered, not performed. Then my lamp died, and all I could hear was the sound of metal fingers scratching against my helmet. When I woke, I was on my back. Everything was quiet again, too quiet. My helmet light was dead, the air thick as mud in my lungs. For a long time, I didn't move. I couldn't. Every muscle felt carved from stone. My mind was blank, except for one looping thought. Get out. I pushed myself up, blinking in the pitch dark. I had no sense of direction, only the faint metallic taste of blood and dust in my mouth. My radio crackled once, faint, distant, then fell silent again. Hello, I whispered. Anyone? Static. Then a single knock. Not again. Davy. Nothing. Only the slow drip of water somewhere deeper in the mine. I pressed forward, feeling the wall with my hand. The rock was cold, damp. The tunnel began to slope upward, and for the first time in hours, maybe days, I saw light, a faint, golden shimmer ahead. I staggered toward it, half crawling, half walking, my legs shaking under me. Every few seconds, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, matching my own rhythm. Every time I stopped, they stopped too. When I finally reached the opening, it wasn't sunlight that greeted me. It was the harsh white beam of rescue lamps. Voices shouted, hands grabbed me. Someone lifted my helmet off. The light burned my eyes. I remember someone saying, "We got one." Another voice, "Where's the rest of them?" They pulled me out of the tunnel and into the cold night air. Snowflakes drifted through the beams of the searchlights, melting on my skin. I'd never felt anything so clean, so light. They said I was lucky, that the collapse had sealed most of the lower shafts, that anyone trapped below would have suffocated within hours. "Was there anyone with you?" the medic asked. I hesitated. "Davy?" He exchanged a look with one of the others. "We found his helmet. That's all." I didn't answer. They took me to a tent, wrapped me in blankets, and handed me a cup of water. I could still feel the vibration of those knocks in my bones. When I closed my eyes, I saw the hatch turning, the hand. A few days later, they called it a geological event. That was the official phrase, neat, clinical, stripped of everything human. A section of the mine had collapsed, 23 men lost. No survivors beyond the initial rescue. I signed the report. I nodded when they told me to rest. I even smiled for the cameras. When the company rep thanked the bravery and endurance of the crew. But at night, I still hear him. It started faintly, a rhythm. 3 knocks, 2, sometimes from the walls of my apartment, sometimes from the pipes. Once, I woke to find dust falling from the ceiling. Fine, gray, familiar. I told myself it was just stress, survivor's guilt, but then the phone rang. No one on the other end, just the sound of breathing. Slow, wet, familiar. I haven't gone back underground since, not officially, but the company keeps calling. "You're one of the few who knows that section," they say. "We could use your expertise." I always say no. Still, some nights, when the wind moves just right, I swear I can smell it, that dry iron scent of the tunnels. And beneath it, something else. Something alive. Yesterday, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was a miner's helmet, scratched, burned, and carved into the side, faint but unmistakable. 322. I dropped it. I didn't open the door for the rest of the day. Tonight, I can hear the knocks again. Closer this time, coming from inside the walls. I try not to look, but the shadows move differently now. They stretch wrong upward, like they're trying to crawl out of the floor. And when I close my eyes, I see him. Davy, covered in dust, eyes hollow, lips moving soundlessly. Sometimes, I think he's asking for help. Sometimes, I think he's asking me to come back. The walls groan. My lights flicker. 3 knocks. 2. And then a whisper right next to my ear. "You left me." It had been raining relentlessly for 3 days. I could hear the thunder echoing in the distance and the pounding of raindrops against the window panes of my countryside cabin. Every flash of lightning lit up the entire living room for a split second, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I was sitting by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, trying to lose myself in a book. But every time thunder cracked, I jumped a little, not out of surprise, but because the sound carried something heavy, something unsettling. When another lightning bolt hit nearby, I noticed one of the windows had come ajar. Rain splashed onto the floor. With a sigh, I set my book aside and stood up to close it. As I peered outside, I saw only darkness stretching endlessly beyond the trees. The forest swayed violently, their silhouettes moving like restless spirits in the night. The storm had swallowed the world whole, leaving only shadows, wind, and the steady whisper of rain. I sat back down near the fireplace, the glow of the flames reflecting in my eyes. The room was warm, but the cold air from outside somehow still crept in, brushing against my neck like a ghostly hand. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was safe here. Alone, yes, but safe. And then, the lights went out. The entire house was swallowed by darkness in an instant. The sudden silence of electricity made the sound of the storm even louder. For a moment, I didn't move. My heart pounded as my eyes struggled to adjust. I could see nothing but faint outlines of the furniture. The dying fire, the endless black around me. My body froze, locked by an old fear I thought I'd outgrown. The fear of the dark. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "It's okay. You just need a candle." So I stood up, trembling slightly, and began walking toward the kitchen. My bare feet made soft sounds on the wooden floor, almost drowned by the rain. I hummed an old song to distract myself, one my mother used to sing to me whenever I was scared as a child. Using the dim light of my phone, I searched through drawers and shelves until I finally found a single candle. Relief washed over me, but just as I was about to light it, my phone rang. The sound shattered the silence so suddenly that I screamed. The candle slipped from my hands, rolling across the counter. I grabbed the phone, my hands shaking. It was my mother. "Hello," I said, trying to sound calm. "Darling." Her voice was soft but filled with concern. "Are you all right? What's that noise?" I told her about the blackout, about the storm that hadn't stopped for days. She reminded me to stay calm, to keep warm, to not go outside under any circumstance. Hearing her voice soothed me instantly. She was far away in London, visiting my sister, but at that moment, it felt like she was right beside me. My fear began to fade. When the call ended, I picked up the candle again and finally lit it. The tiny flame flickered weakly, illuminating the corners of the room. My shadow grew long on the wall, stretched, distorted, as if someone else was standing behind me. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. Outside, the wind howled louder than before. The rain came down in thick sheets, drumming against the roof. I moved to the window again and saw the moon faintly, glowing behind the clouds, full, pale, and cold. For a moment, it almost looked peaceful. I wanted to believe that maybe, by morning, the storm would end and the world would be calm again. I returned to the fireplace, the candle trembling in my hand. The flicker of the flame cast moving shapes across the ceiling. I sat down, wrapping the blanket tighter around me. I could still hear the rain and wind, but somewhere underneath, I thought I heard something else. A distant noise, a voice. No, probably just the wind. My eyelids grew heavy, and eventually, exhaustion took over. I decided to lie down on the couch and close my eyes for a while. The fire had almost gone out, but the faint orange glow was enough to make me feel safe. As I drifted into sleep, I told myself the same thing over and over again. It's just a storm, nothing else. But I was wrong, because that night was only just beginning. A loud scream shattered the silence. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering in my chest. The fire had long died out, only cold ashes remained. The candle had melted down to a stub. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I had really heard it, or if it was just part of a dream. But then I heard it again. A scream, far away, yet sharp enough to slice through the rain. I sat up slowly, straining my ears. The storm had quieted down. The rain now fell in a steady rhythm, soft but unending. Beyond it, I could hear dogs barking somewhere in the distance. Their howls echoed across the dark valley like warnings carried by the wind. Probably just stray dogs, I whispered to myself, though my voice trembled. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But something about that scream had sounded too human, too desperate. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room. For a heartbeat, I saw my reflection in the window, and something else behind it. A shape, small, pale, gone in an instant when darkness returned. I froze, my breath hitched. I couldn't move. I didn't want to look again, but I had to. With shaking hands, I picked up the candle and walked closer to the window. The flame flickered wildly, casting trembling shadows across my face. I took a deep breath, pulled the curtain slightly aside, and looked out. Nothing. Just the rain falling in silver streaks. Just the forest swaying under the moonlight. I let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half exhaustion. My imagination was getting the best of me. It always did, especially when I was alone. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling under my skin. I stepped away from the window and sat back down. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell anymore. The candlelight danced, the rain whispered, and slowly my heartbeat began to settle. Then I heard it again. That scream. This time, closer. It was the cry of a girl, terrified, raw, pleading. I felt my blood run cold. The dogs started barking again, louder now. The entire forest seemed to come alive with the sound of panic. I covered my ears, whispering, "It's not real. It's not real," but it was. I knew it was. The scream turned into sobs, then into silence, and then, knocking, 3 sharp knocks at my door. My body went rigid. Every instinct told me not to move, not to make a sound. I sat frozen, staring at the door, waiting. Another knock. Louder, desperate. My hands were shaking so badly. The candle nearly fell from my grasp. "Who's there?" I called out, but my voice came out as a whisper. No answer. Only rain, only wind. I took one small step toward the door, then another. My heart beat so fast it hurt. When I reached for the handle, thunder crashed and I stopped. I couldn't do it. I backed away slowly, trembling from head to toe. The knocks stopped. Silence returned, but I could still feel something. A presence. Right outside the door, watching, waiting. I ran and hid under the table, just like a terrified child. It sounds ridiculous now, but in that moment, it felt like the only safe place left. I sat there, knees to my chest, listening to the rain, to my breath, to the sound of my own heart. Then came the scraping, a faint sound at first, like fingernails dragging across wood, then louder, closer, right at the door. I pressed my hands to my ears. I wanted it to stop. I wanted morning to come. I wanted someone, anyone, to be here with me. The clock on the wall ticked painfully slow, every sound blending with the rain and thunder, and then, silence again. Long, heavy silence. After what felt like forever, I crawled out from under the table. My legs were weak. I couldn't tell if I was still hearing things or if it had truly stopped. Slowly, I stood up, grabbed the candle, and walked toward the door once more. I hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, I unlatched it. The door creaked open. No one. The cold night air rushed in, damp and sharp. The rain had weakened to a drizzle, and everything outside glistened under the pale moonlight. I stepped forward, half expecting something to jump out, but there was nothing, only silence. Then my foot hit something soft. I looked down. A girl, lying motionless on the ground, her clothes soaked in rain, her face covered in blood. The candle slipped from my hand and went out. The candle fell from my hand and vanished into the mud, snuffing out its fragile light. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The only illumination came from the distant lightning that flickered across the sky, bathing the girl's still body in a ghostly blue. She was young, no more than 15, maybe 16. Her hair clung to her face in wet, tangled strands. Blood streaked down her neck, diluted by the rain into faint crimson. Rivers that disappeared into the earth beneath her. I wanted to scream, but no sound left my throat. My knees gave way, and I fell beside her. "Hello? Can you hear me?" My voice was trembling, lost in the storm. I touched her shoulder gently. Her skin was cold, too cold. For a terrifying second, I thought she was dead. But then her fingers twitched. A breath, soft and ragged, escaped her lips. She was alive. My fear shifted into urgency. I slid my arms under her, struggling to lift her frail, soaked body. She was lighter than I expected, her frame trembling as if even unconscious, she could still feel the pain. I brought her inside, closed the door, and set her down near the fire pit. There was no fire left, only gray ashes. Still, it was better than the cold night. I rushed to fetch a towel, anything to dry her off, and found one near the sink. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every sound in the cabin, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind through the shutters, felt louder, heavier. When I returned, the girl's eyes were open. They were wide and full of terror. She looked at me as though I were another nightmare, crawling out of the dark. "It's okay," I whispered, kneeling beside her. "You're safe here." She tried to speak, but her lips were trembling too hard. I offered her a glass of water. She sipped weakly, then coughed, clutching her chest. When she finally found her voice, it came out broken, almost childlike. "Don't let them find me, please." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I asked. She looked toward the window, where the rain still whispered against the glass. "They'll come back. They said they would." He said I'd never get away. Her eyes darted around the room like a frightened animal, and I could feel her panic filling the air. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't even know what she'd been through. I wrapped the towel around her shoulders and spoke softly. "You're safe. Nobody will hurt you here. I promise." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. They always come back. They always find us." My heart pounded. "Who are they?" Her answer was almost a whisper, barely audible through the rain. "Men. The ones who take children. They said we had to beg, or they'd—" She stopped, covering her mouth, as if the memory itself was too painful to speak aloud. I felt the air go still. The stories, the screams that the villagers had told me about, the ones people mistook for ghosts, they weren't ghosts at all. They were real. The haunted house, the girls' cries, the mysterious sounds at night, it had all been the echoes of something much darker, a crime hidden under the veil of superstition. I took a deep breath and reached for my phone. No signal. The storm had cut the line completely. My stomach twisted. "Listen," I said gently. "We need to get help. I'll call the police as soon as the network comes back. You'll be safe. I swear it." She nodded slowly, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. Then, in a broken voice, she said, "There are others. They're still out there. Please, you have to help them." Her plea hit me like ice. I looked into her eyes, and for the first time, I saw something beyond fear—hope. Weak, trembling hope, but hope nonetheless. "I will," I promised. "I'll help them all." Thunder rolled again, shaking the windows. For a brief moment, the room flashed bright white. The girl flinched, her eyes darting to the door. I followed her gaze. For just a second, I thought I saw a shadow move across the porch, broad, gone before the lightning faded. My stomach dropped. I got up and slowly walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cold glass. Nothing, just rain and wind. Still, my instincts screamed that we weren't alone. I turned back to the girl, but she was already trembling again, her voice breaking into whispers. "He's here," she said. "He came back for me." The lights flickered once, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed us whole. The world disappeared into blackness. I could hear only the rain pounding against the windows and the thunder rolling through the hills. My heart beat so violently that I thought the sound alone would give us away. "Stay still," I whispered, fumbling for my phone again. The screen glowed faintly, just enough to paint our faces in a ghostly blue hue. No signal. The storm had swallowed everything. The girl clutched my arm so tightly that her nails dug into my skin. "He's here," she breathed, her voice trembling. "He's right outside." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to listen. Between the thunderclaps, I heard a crunch of boots in the wet gravel. Slow, heavy, coming closer. My entire body tensed. The sound moved toward the door. Then, silence. I motioned for the girl to hide. She crawled behind the sofa, trembling, her breathing shallow. I took the nearest thing I could find, a fireplace poker, and stood perfectly still. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. A low knock echoed through the cabin, not frantic, not desperate, calm, controlled. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. I couldn't speak. The rain was falling harder now, sheets of water blurring everything beyond the window. The handle of the door rattled once, twice. "Open up," a man's voice called, low and raspy. "We just need shelter from the rain." His tone was eerily casual, but something about it felt wrong. Too steady, too confident. I didn't answer. He tried again. "Hey." I saw the light in there. "Don't be rude now." The girl whimpered from behind the couch. I turned toward her, putting a finger to my lips. Then came another sound, the unmistakable scrape of metal. He was trying to pick the lock. My chest tightened. I backed away slowly, my hand gripping the poker so tightly that my knuckles ached. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the silhouette of a man outside the window. Broad shoulders, hood pulled low, a glint of something metallic in his hand. When the thunder faded, I heard a second voice, a whisper. "She's in there. I told you, 2 of them." The door shook violently. The girl screamed. "Run," I shouted, grabbing her hand. We bolted through the narrow hallway toward the back door. My mind raced. What if it was locked? What if there was no escape? The cabin seemed to stretch endlessly, every step echoing like a countdown to disaster. Behind us, the front door splintered under a powerful kick. The men were inside. I yanked the back door open. It was jammed. Panic surged. I slammed my shoulder against it, once, twice, until it gave way, sending us tumbling into the freezing rain. "Go," I screamed, pulling the girl toward the trees. The storm blinded us. Branches whipped our faces. Mud clung to our feet. But adrenaline kept us running. I could hear their voices behind us, shouting, furious, hunting. "There, don't let them get away." The girl tripped and fell. I grabbed her arm, lifting her, but she was sobbing uncontrollably. I can't run anymore." "Yes, you can," I shouted over the rain. "Just a little farther." We reached the edge of the clearing, where the ground sloped sharply down toward the road. My car was parked at the bottom, half hidden under a blanket of rain. Salvation or so I thought. Another flash of lightning and there they were, 2 figures emerging from the storm, walking slowly toward us. The tall one in front held a knife glinting orange in the light. The girl froze. "That's him." "Run to the car," I yelled, pushing her forward. "Run to the car," I yelled, pushing her forward. I turned back to face the men, gripping the poker like a sword. My heart thundered in my chest. The tall one laughed, his voice echoing through the rain. "Brave, aren't you?" he said. "But she's ours. You shouldn't have opened that door. She's a child," I screamed. He tilted his head, not for long. He lunged. I swung the poker with every ounce of strength I had. It connected with his arm, and he roared in pain. The second man rushed me, tackling me to the ground. The mud was cold and thick, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Run," I shouted again, hoping the girl was already in the car. The man's hands wrapped around my throat. His breath was hot and foul, his eyes wild with rage. I kicked, twisted, grabbed a rock, and smashed it against his face. He howled, blood mixing with rain. I pushed him off and scrambled to my feet. The girl was in the car, pounding on the window, screaming for me. I ran, slipping and sliding through the mud, just as the taller man came after me again. The car keys were in my pocket, shaking in my trembling hands. I opened the door, shoved the girl inside, and slammed the lock just as the man slammed his fist against the window. His eyes were inches from mine, cold, predatory, filled with fury. Then, from somewhere down the road, headlights appeared. The men turned. A siren wailed in the distance. The girl had called the police before. No, she couldn't have. She didn't have a phone. But someone had. The 2 men vanished into the forest as the patrol car skidded to a halt beside us. 2 officers stepped out, shouting orders, guns drawn. I collapsed against the steering wheel, trembling with relief. The girl sobbed quietly beside me, her small hand clutching mine. We were alive. For now. The patrol car's flashing lights painted the rains, trees in harsh red and blue streaks. I sank into the seat, every muscle shaking with exhaustion, relief, and disbelief. The girl leaned against me, still sobbing, her small hands gripping mine like she feared letting go would make the nightmare return. Even through the storm, I could feel the weight of what had just happened, the terror, the pursuit, the knowledge that she had been so close to disappearing forever. The officers approached cautiously, scanning the surrounding forest. "Are there any more of them?" one asked. I shook my head, still catching my breath. I don't know. They came through the front door, and I chased them out the back. That's all I know. One officer took the girl gently into his arms, wrapping her in a warm blanket. "You're safe now, sweetheart," he said softly. Her body trembled against him, but I could see a spark of relief in her eyes. She was finally safe. As we drove slowly back toward the nearest town, the storm began to subside, the rain softening to a drizzle. The girl's story unfolded between sobs and hiccups, fragmented and terrifying. She had been kidnapped by a local gang that specialized in forcing children into begging rings and criminal labor. Each day had been a struggle to survive, her captors punishing any attempt at resistance with vicious beatings. Today, she had refused yet again, and they had lashed her mercilessly, leaving her bloodied and desperate. She tried to get away, she whispered, trembling. They said if I ran, they'd make sure I never came back. Her voice cracked, and she buried her face against my shoulder. I thought I was going to die. I pressed a hand to her back, trying to soothe her. You're safe now, I promise you. Nothing will hurt you again. When we arrived at the police station, officers immediately took statements, recording every detail she could remember. They were methodical, careful, and professional. Yet I could see the tension in their eyes. They had dealt with many cases before, but the severity and cruelty of this gang left even seasoned officers shaken. They'll pay for what they've done, one officer said quietly, his jaw tight with anger. We're going after the rest of them. While the investigation began, I stayed with the girl, offering what comfort I could. We waited together in the small, sterile room, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional police radio crackle filling the silence. It was a far cry from the darkness of the cabin, the storm, and the terror outside. Yet, even here, the memories lingered. Every shadow, every creak in the building made me flinch, my senses still tuned to the terror we had just escaped. Hours passed. The girl finally calmed enough to eat a small meal and sip some water. I held her hand the entire time, unwilling to let her feel alone again. It was then that I realized the gravity of what had occurred. The screams, which everyone had thought were ghostly, were real. They were cries for help, pain and fear made audible in the darkness. What had seemed like a haunting was, in truth, a desperate plea from someone trapped in a living nightmare. By the early morning, the officers had successfully tracked down and apprehended the gang. 5 men were arrested, along with evidence of their cruel operations: small cages, chains, and the belongings of other children who had not been so lucky. The girl's bravery, combined with quick thinking and a small act of courage on my part, had ended their reign of terror, at least for now. The girl was placed in protective care, her safety a top priority, while investigators worked tirelessly to contact her family and ensure the other victims were found. I watched her leave the station, bundled in warm clothing, smiling faintly despite the exhaustion etched across her young face. A mixture of relief and sadness washed over me, relief that she was safe, sadness for the ordeal she had endured. As I drove home in the quiet morning, the sky clearing to reveal soft sunlight breaking through retreating clouds, I reflected on everything that had happened. The house, the screams, the legend that had drawn me here. It had been a catalyst, a coincidence that placed me in the right place at the right time. What everyone had thought was a ghost, a supernatural presence haunting the old cabin, was something far more human and horrifying. Real evil, dressed in flesh, exploiting fear for profit. I realized then that courage does not require strength, only the willingness to act when fear grips every fiber of your being. The girl's courage, my own determination, and the timely arrival of help had combined to save a life. The echo of her cries would forever remind me that sometimes what seems supernatural has its roots in the darkest corners of human nature. Weeks later, the story began to circulate quietly. The police commended me, but I refused recognition. This was never about fame or heroism. It was about survival, empathy, and the quiet understanding that the world often hides monsters in plain sight. The girl, safe now, would never have to live in fear again. That thought alone was enough to ease the weight that had pressed on my chest since that night. And though the cabin still stands, abandoned and battered by the elements, I will never return. The rain that once masked the screams has dried, the shadows have shifted, and the darkness no longer hides secrets, but I will never forget the terror I felt, the sound of her cries, and the realization that courage is born in moments when every instinct tells you to run. This is the truth behind the story. No ghosts, no phantoms, only fear, human cruelty, and one small life saved through the unlikely bravery of 2 strangers in a storm. And in that truth, Perhaps there is hope, that light can pierce even the darkest night.